The man who trusts only God walks a path that many fear to tread. While the world scrambles for certainty and money, status, connections, and logic, he steps out into the unknown with nothing but invisible strength. He looks not to man, nor to systems, nor to the comforts of this earth. He has made a choice to trust only God. This kind of trust doesn't begin in loud proclamations. It begins in silence, in loneliness, in the quiet places where doubt screams the loudest, when friends fall away, when resources dry up, when everything that can be shaken is shaken, yet he remains still. It wasn't always easy. There were moments where even he wondered if God was still listening. He wrestled with the silence, questioned the delays, and cried when no one saw. But in every tear, God was building something unseen. A foundation not of sand, but of rock. Faith that no storm could shake, and when others bowed to fear, he bowed only to God. While others relied on plans, he relied on promises. When others said it's impossible, he remembered that with God, all things are possible. When others sought validation from people, he sought only the approval of heaven. His eyes were not fixed on what is seen, but on what is eternal. And because of that, he saw what others missed. He didn't need applause. He didn't chase titles. He didn't move according to trends. He moved when God said move, and stood still when God said wait. And while the world mocked, while they laughed at his conviction and whispered about his strange confidence, he kept building, kept believing, kept trusting, quietly, consistently, courageously. And then everything changed. The breakthrough came not because he fought harder, but because he surrendered deeper. Not because he had a backup plan, but because he had no plan except God's. His faith moved mountains not by force, but by obedience. His prayers unlocked doors that no key could open. His surrender drew the presence of heaven into his life. And suddenly the very people who doubted him asked, "How did this happen?" But it wasn't him. It never was. It was God. Always God. You see, when a man trusts only God, he becomes dangerous to the enemy. He cannot be bought, manipulated, or controlled. His heart belongs to one master. His soul is anchored beyond this world. He is free, not because life is easy, but because his spirit is no longer a slave to fear. He doesn't need to know the way. He just needs to know who is leading him. So if you've ever wondered what happens to the man who trusts only God, look again. He may be hidden for a season, he may be misunderstood, but in time God will honor that trust. And when he does, it will be evident, not by the size of the man's platform, but by the weight of his peace, the depth of his joy, and the strength of his purpose. Because the man who trusts only God is never truly alone, never truly defeated, never truly lacking. His faith changes everything, not just around him, but within him. He becomes a living testimony of what God can do through someone who refuses to bow to anything but the will of heaven. Trust only God, and watch how everything begins to change. True faith begins in silence and surrender. It doesn't always rise in grand churches or amidst loud worship. Often it takes root in the quiet corners of life where no one sees, where no applause is heard, and where the heart is stripped bare of all its distractions. The journey of trusting only God often begins in isolation. It begins when the voices that once comforted you, when the plans you built collapse one by one, and you're left standing with nothing but your breath and your belief. This isn't weakness. This is the divine setup. When earthly support fades, it's not punishment, it's preparation. God doesn't remove the people or the plans from your life to harm you. He removes what you once leaned on so you can learn to lean only on Him. You see, God will not compete for your trust. In those moments, those raw, painful moments, God begins His real work, not the kind of work you can see with your eyes or measure with your hands. It's the hidden work, the heart work. God begins to build an unshakable foundation of faith, stone by stone, from the inside out. And he does it through silence, through waiting, through letting you wrestle with doubt and still choose him. That's where trust is born. Not when everything makes sense, but when nothing does and you still say, God, I believe you. Surrender is not a one-time decision. It's a daily laying down of your own understanding, your own timing, your own plans. It's saying, even if you don't answer the way I hoped, I'll still follow. That kind of surrender terrifies the enemy, because a man or woman who has nothing to lose except their relationship with God is unstoppable. You can't bribe them with fame. You can't threaten them with loss. Their security is not in this world. It's in the one who holds the world. The silence that feels like abandonment is often God's classroom. It's where he teaches you how to walk by faith, not by sight. It's where he trains your ears to hear his whisper even when your heart is screaming. It's where he sharpens your spiritual vision so that you begin to see beyond what is and into what could be. You start to see trials as training, not punishment. You begin to interpret delays not as denials, but as divine protection or preparation. Trusting only God changes your posture. You stop chasing people for validation. You stop begging circumstances to work in your favor. You stop panicking when things don't go according to your plan. Why? Because now you understand. God's plan is better. His silence doesn't mean absence. His delays are not rejections. His delays are not rejections. His no is often a setup for a greater yes. And in this sacred surrender, you're not just surviving. You're being transformed. Your character deepens. Your prayers grow bolder. Your peace becomes unexplainable. People start to notice a different kind of strength in you, not the kind that comes from pride or position, but the kind that comes from knowing your source, your identity, and your purpose. You're no longer shaken by bad news because you've learned to stand firm on the good news. Eventually, the same silence that once felt like a void becomes your place of power. You learn to love the quiet because that's where you hear God best. You begin to crave his presence more than platforms, his voice more than applause, his timing more than your own. And when the breakthrough finally comes, when the healing happens, the opportunity arrives, or the promise is fulfilled, you don't brag about your endurance. You point to his faithfulness. You say, it was God, only God. And now, you carry something the world can't fake. An unshakable trust. A fire that can't be extinguished. A testimony that no one can deny. Because it wasn't built in comfort. It was born in the silence. It was formed in the surrender. Combination. He moves by God's voice, not the world's noise. The man who trusts only God lives by a rhythm that can't be explained by culture or common sense. He doesn't chase what's trending. He doesn't get swept away by the urgency of the crowd or the pressure of popular opinion. While the world races to keep up with the next big thing, he stands still, waiting for divine instruction. His steps are not directed by fear, anxiety, or ambition. They are directed by the quiet voice of God that whispers, this is the way, walk in it. To others, he may seem slow, careful, maybe even hesitant. They wonder why he's not rushing to take every opportunity that comes his way. They question his choices and sometimes even mock his restraint. But what they don't understand is that he's not living for them. He's not concerned with impressing people or proving himself. He's waiting for something higher. He's listening for the voice that cannot be mistaken. And when that voice speaks, when God says, go, he moves with boldness that can't be explained by logic. This kind of obedience takes incredible strength. It's far easier to follow the crowd, to blend in, to do what makes sense to the majority. But the man who trusts only God has learned that God's ways are not like man's ways. What makes sense to the world often looks like foolishness to heaven. And what heaven values, faith, patience, surrender, humility, is often overlooked by the world. That's why he doesn't live to please people. He lives to obey the one who sees what no one else can see. When you live like this, there will be moments of deep misunderstanding. People may call you stubborn, unwise, or even delusional. They'll say you're missing out. They'll point to what you could have had if you had just done things their way. But what they miss is the peace you carry, divine instruction. And when God gives you a word, it's not just a suggestion. It's a guarantee. This obedience also requires a deep level of trust. Sometimes God will lead you in a direction that doesn't look promising at first. Sometimes He'll tell you to wait when everything around you is screaming, move. Other times He'll tell you to go forward when the path ahead looks impossible. But the man who trusts only God knows that God's voice doesn't lead to destruction, it leads to destiny. Even if the route is unusual, even if it takes longer than expected, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. He moves with courage, not because he's fearless, but because he fears God more than failure. He would rather make a mistake trying to follow God than succeed by ignoring Him. That's the kind of reverence that keeps him steady. It's what gives him confidence when the road ahead is unclear. He doesn't need to know the whole picture. He just needs to know who's holding the map. And as he continues on this path, something powerful begins to happen. God starts to honor his obedience. Doors begin to open that no man could have opened. Battles are won without a fight. The right connections find him at the right time. He's not striving for success. Success is following him, not because he's chasing it, but because he's chasing God. That's the secret. This kind of life can be lonely at times. It's not easy to walk in a direction that most people don't understand. But the reward is worth it. Because at the end of the day, it's not about being understood, it's about being obedient. And the man who trusts only God knows that obedience brings blessings that far outweigh the cost. He doesn't move because of pressure. He moves because of peace. He doesn't change direction because of noise. He waits for the still, small voice that never leads him astray. And when he hears it, when he knows it's God, he doesn't hesitate. He acts. Not because he sees the whole staircase, but because he trusts the one who does. And that's what sets him apart. He lives by faith, not by sight. He listens more than he speaks. He waits more than he worries. He acts not from fear of missing out, but from a deep conviction that God's timing is always perfect. He is unshakable, not because he's strong in himself, but because he is anchored in the one who never fails. He moves by God's voice, and in that he finds his strength. His strength is in his dependence. It sounds like a contradiction in a world that celebrates independence, self-reliance, and personal power. But the man who trusts only God understands something far deeper. True strength doesn't come from within. It comes from surrender. While others are busy building their lives around strategies, connections, and security nets, he is building his life around God's promises. He has come to a place where he fully understands that everything else can fail, but God cannot. This kind of dependence isn't born in comfort. It's forged in the fire of experience. When plans fall apart, people disappoint, and the resources you were counting on disappear. It's in those moments when you realize that your strength isn't enough. Your ideas won't always work. Your friends won't always show up. Your plans won't always unfold as expected. That's when God becomes not just an option, but your only option. And that's when true power begins to rise. The world teaches that being dependent is weak, that needing someone or something outside of yourself is a flaw. But in the kingdom of God, dependence is the pathway to supernatural strength. Because when you know that you can't do it on your own, you open the door for God to show up and do what only He can do. And the man who trusts only God understands this deeply. He doesn't depend on himself because he knows his own limitations. He's not ashamed to admit his need. In fact, he celebrates it, because in his weakness, God's strength is made perfect. His prayers are not casual or routine. They are lifelines. He doesn't pray because it's religious habit. He prays because it's survival. He knows that every step, every decision, every moment requires God's guidance and grace. And because of that, he lives in constant communion with the one who holds everything together. His strength is not loud or boastful. It's quiet, consistent, and anchored in truth. You won't always see it on the outside, but it sustains him through storms that would break other men. This man doesn't need to be the smartest in the room, the richest on the block, or the most admired by the crowd. His identity is not tied to accomplishments. It's tied to the one who called him. He measures his success not by how much he's gathered, but by how faithfully he's obeyed. And in this dependence, he walks in a peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. When the world celebrates pride, he chooses humility. When others chase recognition, he chooses quiet obedience. When others panic in lack, he trusts in provision. Because he knows who his source is. He knows that God sees what's ahead even when he doesn't. So when the ground shakes, he doesn't. When others fall apart, he stands firm. Not because of what he has, but because of who has him. People may wonder how he keeps going. They may ask how he stays calm, how he keeps believing when everything seems impossible. The answer is simple. He's not carrying the weight alone. He casts his burdens on the Lord, and he knows that God sustains those who trust him. He knows that what looks like the end is often the beginning in God's eyes. That what feels like lack is often a setup for overflow. He has learned to rely on the promises of God like they are oxygen. He holds on to them when things don't make sense. He speaks them when fear creeps in. He builds his life on them when everything else feels unstable. These promises are not distant ideas to him. They are living truth. And because of them, he keeps moving forward, even when the road ahead is foggy. He doesn't need to control everything because he trusts the one who does. He doesn't need every answer because he walks with the one who is the answer. In the eyes of the world, he may look weak, but in the eyes of heaven, he is mighty, because he has learned the secret. Strength is not found in standing alone, but in depending fully on God. And when you truly depend on God, you're never without power, never without direction, and never without hope. His strength is in his dependence, and that's what makes him unshakable. His faith unlocks the impossible. By trusting only God, he begins to witness things that others call coincidence or luck. But he knows better. He knows that what's happening around him isn't random or accidental. It's divine. While others are working in their own strength, relying on what they can see and measure, he stands on the unseen promises of God. And that faith, even when it's the size of a mustard seed, begins to shift things that human effort never could. He doesn't shout to be heard or push to be seen. He simply believes, and that belief is powerful. It activates the hand of God. It opens doors that were once bolted shut. It levels mountains that seemed permanent. His faith is not based on how things look, but on who God is. So when people say it's impossible, he smiles because he knows the one who makes all things possible. He's seen too much to doubt now. He's walked through too many valleys and come out stronger on the other side. He's faced walls that should have stopped him, but somehow they crumbled at just the right time. Not because he forced them to fall, but because he obeyed and believed. There's a quiet power in that kind of faith. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't chase approval. It simply trusts. It says, God, I don't know how, but I know you. That is where the impossible begins to bend. When the man who trusts only God steps forward in obedience, even when everything around him says retreat, the supernatural begins to unfold, not with lightning bolts or loud declarations, but in the still, steady movement of God-honoring belief. He has learned that faith isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. It's choosing to keep walking even when the ground feels uncertain. It's choosing to believe that a closed door doesn't mean a closed future. It's believing that God's silence is not absence and that delays are not denials. So when others give up, he presses in. When others panic, he prays. And because of that persistence, he experiences breakthrough after breakthrough. He doesn't see obstacles the same way others do. While most people see walls as dead ends, he sees them as opportunities for God to show up. When resources run low, he doesn't sink into despair. He looks to heaven. When relationships fail or plans collapse, he doesn't spiral into fear. He stands still and waits for God to make a way. And God always does. Not always the way he expected, but always in a way that reveals God's hand and timing. People may look at his life and wonder how he keeps overcoming, how he keeps getting up after disappointments, how he keeps believing when others would have quit. The answer is simple. He trusts in the God who cannot fail, and that trust births the miraculous. It may not always be instant, and it may not always look dramatic, but it's always real. Because the impossible isn't always about flashy miracles. Sometimes it's about hearts healed, peace restored, doors opened quietly, and strength given exactly when it's needed. Over time, the man who trusts only God becomes a living testimony. His life tells a story that can't be explained by effort alone. People see the fruit, but they don't always see the root. Deep faith, quiet obedience, relentless trust. And it's that root system, hidden beneath the surface, that allows him to weather storms and still stand tall. He doesn't crumble under pressure because he knows his foundation is God, and God does not shake. Faith like this changes everything. It changes how he speaks, how he dreams, how he walks into a room. He no longer limits his expectations to what he can achieve. He expects God to do what only God can do. And that expectation pulls heaven into earth. That expectation creates space for the miraculous. That expectation unlocks the impossible. So even when he's walking into a situation that looks hopeless, he walks in with hope. Not in himself, but in the one who parts seas, raises the dead, multiplies the little, and brings beauty from ashes. He has seen it before, and he knows he'll see it again. His faith isn't perfect, but it's persistent. And because of that, the impossible becomes possible. The unmovable begins to move. The unthinkable becomes reality. Not by force, not by fame, but through faithful obedience. His faith unlocks the impossible, and through it, he becomes a vessel for God's glory. He is spiritually unshakable. The man who trusts God alone cannot be moved by fear, overwhelmed by pressure, or blinded by pride. While the world around him may rise and fall, shake and tremble, his soul remains anchored. He is not perfect, but he is planted. His peace doesn't come from what he owns, who he knows, or how much control he has. It comes from the one who holds all things together. When everything around him is uncertain, his spirit is steady. He's grounded not in emotions, but in eternal truth. This kind of stability doesn't come overnight. It's built through trials, carved through pain, and tested in silence. It comes from facing storms and discovering that God is still present in the middle of them. It comes from walking through valleys and realizing that shadows don't mean abandonment. Over time, the man who trusts only God learns how to stand when others fall, how to stay calm when others panic, and how to trust deeply even when the way forward is unclear. His roots grow deep, not because life has been easy, but because he chose to believe when belief wasn't convenient. Fear cannot control him because he knows who is in control. That doesn't mean he never feels afraid, but it means fear never makes the final decision. He's not driven by the what-ifs of life. He's driven by the God said. His confidence is not based on outcome, it's based on God's presence. And because of that, he remains unshaken. Pride has no grip on him because he knows where his strength comes from. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. He knows that everything he has, everything he is because of grace. He walks in humility, not because he thinks less of himself, but because he thinks more of God. Pride cannot thrive in a heart that's fully surrendered. And because he is surrendered, he is strong. Pride builds a fragile tower, but humility builds an unshakable foundation. Pressure doesn't break him because he's not trying to impress the world. He's not living for applause. He's not chasing validation. He knows who he is and whose he is. That identity frees him from the exhausting race of performance. He's not measuring success by the standards of men, but by the faithfulness of his obedience. So when the pressure mounts, when expectations rise, he doesn't panic. He prays. He listens. He waits. And then he moves in peace, knowing that God's timing is always perfect. His peace is a mystery to others. They wonder how he can stay so calm in chaos, so hopeful in disappointment, so joyful in uncertainty. But it's not a surface-level peace. It's not denial or ignorance. It's anchored peace. A peace that comes from trusting God more than circumstances. He knows that storms will come, but he also knows who calms them. He knows that pain is real, but so is healing. He knows that delay is not denial and that silence does not mean absence. Because of this, he walks through life with a steadiness that inspires others. There's a weight to his presence, not heavy with ego, but full of substance. When he speaks, it's with wisdom. When he acts, it's with intention. He doesn't waste words or chase drama. He guards his spirit because he knows that spiritual strength isn't just for show. It's his armor, his fuel, his anchor. He stays close to God because he knows that's the only way to remain strong. He feeds on the Word, he worships in quiet, and he listens more than he speaks. And because of this, he's never truly alone. He walks with the presence of God wherever he goes. People may misunderstand him. They may think he's too quiet, too different, too intense. But what they don't see is the fire within him. A fire that burns steady, not flashy. A fire that keeps him alive when the world feels cold. A fire that was lit by faith and fueled by trust. He doesn't need to prove himself because he knows who goes before him. That's why he doesn't crumble under criticism or fall apart when things go wrong. He is spiritually unshakable. Not because life has been easy, but because he's held tightly by the one who never lets go. God honors radical trust. It may not always be visible to others or even to ourselves at times, but when a man chooses to place his entire confidence and hope in God alone, something extraordinary begins to unfold. This kind of trust isn't casual or convenient. It's deep, unwavering, and often misunderstood. People might see it as foolishness, naivety, or even weakness. They may question why someone would hold on to belief when circumstances scream defeat. But God sees differently. He honors that radical trust with blessings that go far beyond material wealth or worldly acclaim. This honor doesn't always come quickly or in the way we expect. Sometimes it is hidden in seasons of waiting, quiet obedience, and unseen faithfulness. The man who trusts God alone learns to walk in patience because he knows that God's timing is perfect even when it feels delayed. He understands that what looks like silence or inactivity is often God's way of preparing something greater. He knows that the reward isn't always immediate, but it is always sure. This patient trust, even in the absence of visible results, is itself a treasure, one that God treasures deeply. God's reward for radical trust is often found in peace. Not just any peace, but a divine peace that surpasses understanding. It is a calmness that flows from knowing that your life is held securely in the hands of the Creator. When the storms rage, when the pressures mount, when everything seems to be falling apart, this peace is the anchor that keeps the man steady. It's not dependent on circumstances or human approval. It is an internal assurance that God is working behind the scenes, that no situation is beyond his control. This peace is a gift given only to those who dare to trust radically, who hold fast to faith when it's hard. Beyond peace, God honors radical trust with purpose. The man who places his confidence solely in God discovers that his life takes on new meaning. He finds himself aligned with a divine mission far greater than his own ambitions. His trust opens doors to opportunities that serve others, uplift communities, and bring glory to God's name. It's not about personal gain or recognition. It's about becoming part of something eternal. This purpose fuels resilience and courage, giving him strength to keep going even when the path is steep and lonely. This impact, the tangible difference made through a life surrendered, is another way God honors radical trust. It may not always be noticed by the world, but it's evident to those who look closely. Lives are changed, hope is restored, and light shines in darkness because of the faithfulness of one who dared to trust completely. The man who depends only on God becomes a catalyst for transformation. His story, his obedience, and his faith ripple outward in ways that no human effort alone could achieve. His impact is a testimony that defies explanation except as the work of divine power. Though the world may reward loud success and visible triumphs, God's honors are often quiet and profound. They come in moments of stillness, in acts of kindness, in unshakable character, and in spiritual fruit that lasts forever. This kind of honor is not subject to fluctuation or criticism. It stands firm through seasons of trial and triumph alike. It is a crown that cannot be lost or taken away because it is given by the King of Kings. The man who trusts only God understands this well. He doesn't chase worldly rewards or seek the approval of people. His eyes are fixed on the eternal, and his heart is satisfied with knowing that God sees his faithfulness. Even when misunderstood, mocked, or overlooked, he remains steadfast. He knows that God's honor will be revealed in due time, and when it comes, it surpasses all expectations, bringing a joy, fulfillment, and glory that no earthly riches can match. This radical trust also cultivates humility. The man who relies fully on God is constantly reminded that he is not the source of his own success. He is not the master of his destiny, but a servant of a higher will. This humility keeps him grounded and open to God's guidance. It also makes him approachable, compassionate, and wise. People are drawn to his authenticity because it shines with the light of someone who walks in true dependence on God. Radical trust reshapes identity. It teaches the man that his value is not found in achievements, possessions, or status, but in being God's beloved child. This understanding brings freedom from anxiety, fear, and the need to prove oneself. It replaces striving with resting, striving with surrender, striving with faith. And in that freedom, God's honor flows naturally. Because honor is not something earned by striving, but something bestowed on those who trust. When God honors radical trust, he also strengthens it. The man who dares to place his life fully in God's hands finds himself renewed with courage and hope. He is equipped to face challenges, overcome obstacles, and continue walking forward. This divine reinforcement ensures that trust does not waver, but grows deeper, richer, and more resilient with every trial. It becomes a wellspring of strength that sustains him through all seasons. In the end, God's honor is a testimony to the power of faith. It is a reminder that trusting God alone is never in vain. Though hidden or misunderstood for a time, that trust is a seed that produces a harvest far greater than anything the world can offer. It is rewarded not just with blessings, but with the presence of God, the fulfillment of purpose, and an impact that echoes through eternity. The man who trusts only God walks this path, knowing that radical trust is the key that unlocks God's richest blessings and eternal honor. There are moments in life when the pain feels too heavy to carry, moments when nothing makes sense and you're left asking, why me? You may feel broken, lost, or even abandoned. But even in those darkest moments, there is a deeper truth we often overlook. God has a purpose. Pain is not pointless. It is not random. It is not punishment. It's part of a bigger story that we can't always see right now. Just like a seed must be buried before it can grow, sometimes we must go through the darkest soil for our purpose to take root. When life hurts, it can feel like everything is falling apart, but often it's really falling into place. Think of the times you grew the most, not in comfort, but in struggle. When you were pushed to your limits, tested beyond what you thought you could handle, that pain shaped you. You see, God's purpose isn't always to remove the pain, but to bring something powerful out of it. Sometimes it's to strengthen your faith. Sometimes it's to build your character. Sometimes it's so you can help someone else through the same thing. And sometimes it's simply to bring you closer to Him. We live in a world that tries to avoid pain at all costs. But in God's hands, pain becomes a tool, not a tragedy. He uses what was meant to break you to build you. He takes the tears and turns them into wisdom, compassion, and strength. If you're hurting today, don't lose hope. Don't believe the lie that your pain has no meaning. God sees you. He knows you're suffering. And even when you can't feel Him, He's right there, working, shaping, loving you through it all. And one day you'll look back and realize that the very pain that tried to destroy you was the beginning of something sacred. You'll see how God took what hurt the most and made it a turning point in your story. So hold on. Keep walking. Keep praying. When life hurts you, remember, God has a purpose, and it's more beautiful than you can imagine. Pain is not without purpose. That truth is often hard to hold on to when you're in the middle of deep suffering, when life breaks your heart, when your plans collapse, when you're dealing with grief, betrayal, illness, or failure. It's natural to ask, why is this happening to me? The pain feels so overwhelming, so personal, that it's easy to believe it's all just chaos, that there's no reason behind it. But the truth is, even when life doesn't make sense, there is a deeper, divine purpose unfolding behind the scenes. Every single person on this earth goes through pain. It's a shared human experience, but it's also one that shapes us in unique ways. The hardest moments in life tend to change us the most. They slow us down. They force us to reflect. They peel back the surface of who we are and reveal the deeper parts of us, our resilience, our faith, our inner strength. That's not an accident. God allows certain struggles in our lives not to destroy us, but to develop us. The process is never easy, but it is always meaningful. Sometimes, pain comes into our lives to teach us lessons we would never learn otherwise. When everything is going well, we rarely stop to think about what matters most. We get comfortable, distracted, even spiritually distant. But when life hurts us, when we find ourselves at rock bottom, that's often when we begin to search for something more. That's when we cry out to God with a kind of honesty and desperation we wouldn't have otherwise. Pain has a way of stripping away the noise and bringing clarity to what's truly important. We might not understand the purpose behind our pain while we're in it, but time often reveals its value. Think back to something difficult you went through in the past. At the time, it probably felt unbearable, but looking back, you can often see how it changed you. Maybe it made you stronger, wiser, or more compassionate. Maybe it led you down a path you never would have chosen on your own, but one that brought you closer to your calling. That's not coincidence. That's purpose. That's God at work. There's a beautiful truth in the idea that God never wastes a hurt. Whatever you're going through, no matter how painful or confusing, God can use it. He can take what was meant to harm you and turn it into something good. He can use your pain to build your faith, to shape your character, or to prepare you for something greater. Sometimes the purpose of pain isn't even just about you.